we're now in our realm. We don't have to treat this just as individual action. This is what Durkheim would call a social fact. And his evidence then is to turn to the religious history of Europe and suggest that in traditional societies, offenses are not those that are most injurious to individuals, right, which we might expect to be the core elements of penal law if law had evolved from private vengeance, but instead it's essentially laws of blasphemy. If you read, the Torah, which is, I think, problematic to read as a legal code because it's a very complicated, even if you don't treat it as the received word of God, it's a very complicated text as it was constructed historically, and its political relationship with the Jewish community as a political entity is inconsistent and changing over time. Nonetheless, there's certainly lots of examples in the Torah of exactly what Durkheim's talking about, this role of penal law. And this is where the animation gets really annoying. I don't remember doing this, but let's go back. Just briefly, looking at the laws of Moses, right? Some of them look a little bit like what we would think of as criminal laws. You shall not murder, you shall not steal, maybe even bear false witness, right, or commit adultery, coveting goods, etc. But a lot of these, and indeed the first 4 of them, are not at all what we would take to be laws of personal protection. The first one is you shall have no gods but me, so that the gravest violation would be to pray to an idol or some other god. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. I mean, blasphemy was a capital crime in most Christian states well into the 18th century, and some people were executed for it, including in the colonies of this country, the English colonies. Honor your father and mother, something that should be a capital crime that's violated, I believe. But nonetheless, these are clearly not what we think of as traditional elements of personal rights to property, right to life, etc. These exemplify Durkheim's point that the origin of penal law is in religious sentiments. And that will also be part of his understanding of why penal law begins so severely. Why do we have this tradition of gratuitously violent and painful punishments, like ripping people apart on the scaffold, other things we'll look at later this week that last into the 18th and 19th century? Durkheim will say it's because in its origins, penal law was designed to appease the deity, right? If I blaspheme, you might chuckle, right? But if we were a deeply believing community, we might believe that for me to blaspheme, to denigrate God or verbally or in some linguistic way, without being reprimanded or punished, would render our entire community subject to the vengeance of an outraged God. And if you read the Torah, you find lots of examples of that kind of revenge being taken on community. So the punishment we give the person on the scaffold is not necessarily to intimidate others, although we're happy if it does that. It's instead to appease God, right? So from that point of view, that what looks like surplusage in the punishment is not. So this, we can kind of summarize the crime and punishment cycle, as it were, for Durkheim. This is we can certainly do better clip art than this on PowerPoint. Sorry about that. So it looks like the boxes kind of grew bigger than they were supposed to be. First, you have a crime, which, as we know for Durkheim, is just something that violates deeply held moral conventions. I don't know what I could do in front of you right now that would evoke that. Probably light a cigarette might be the closest. That would sort of immediately bring a sense of shock, horror, desire to punish, etc. There's an emotional reaction when you see that conduct, and it tends to actually bring people together. He has this wonderful description in the chapter about how when there's a crime committed like in a small community, people are running around and they're talking about it, and you can kind of see that even on a street corner in Oakland or Berkeley when there's a police siren and something happens, people kind of come together. Think of how people were on 9/11. They sort of stopped whatever they were doing and got together in their offices or their homes, and those moments tend to actually make us feel very unified. In Miami, where I lived at the time, and where people basically don't talk to each other unless they're mentally ill, etc. I mean, where they're actually talking on their cell phone, you can't see the phone. People were talking to each other. It sort of broke that ice, right? They merged into each other. And for Durkheim, this then constitutes people as a society. They know, they're reminded that what they are is not just individuals, but people who share this common core of convictions. And finally, the punishment itself is a full expression of that, which not only allows the emotions to discharge in this kind of electrical metaphor, but also for the little kids that are watching the execution or whatever, it forms the lesson as to what the common consciousness is, right? This man's actions were reprehensible, and the meaning of that is demonstrated by what you see on that scaffold. And this leads to the final point I want to talk to you about, which is Durkheim's theory of primitive or punishment in traditional society, pre-modern societies. And if you read some of his descriptions, it's very hard not to think of lynchings, right? He tells us that, and here, actually, let me go to this slide, which captures his account better. And again, these are pictures from American lynchings in the early 20th century. He says, as soon as the news of a crime became widely known, this is Durkheim hypothesizing how crime and punishment operated in, quote, primitive societies, the people gathered together, and although the punishment was not predetermined, their reaction was unanimous. In certain cases, it was even people who carried out the sentence collectively as soon as it has been pronounced. Now, I think there's two things that are very problematic about Durkheim's account of primitive punishment as being this kind of immediate and visceral and passionate. One is, as you can see from these lynchings, which take place not in primitive societies, but in racist, modern society of late 19th, early 20th century America, we're seeing people who would meet Durkheim's description of modern people who belong to a complicated division of labor, etc. Nonetheless, exemplifying very much the kind of violent communal ritual violence that Durkheim associates with punishment. It's a reminder that this kind of impulse, this kind of a use of violent punishment to constitute solidarity among people is not necessarily a relic of some past. It can be a very deliberate, manipulated thing to do in the present in order to try to create a sense of solidarity, which is arguably what whites who lynched were doing. They were trying to use their violence against blacks to create a coercive pro-white identity among other whites to some extent. But at the same time, those images, and one of the reasons we have so many of these images is that people sent postcards of these lynchings around. This is how they were kind of rediscovered. People would make postcards out of lynchings and send them to their friends. So for some people, they reflected very unproblematic, even positive, satisfying events. But for other people, including at the time, these lynchings themselves were horrendous crimes of the worst sort that began to generate their own kind of Durkheimian demand for punishment. And indeed, some of the first federal Congress debates about expanding punishment in the 20th century surround this question of a federal lynch law that would make it a crime to lynch. Now, the other thing, I'll be brief here, that's problematic about Durkheim's account is this notion that the penal response is a kind of immediate, instinctual, unmediated response. And that's something that I think is not true even of societies you might want to call primitive. And one of the reasons I assigned as a recommended reading the wonderful, an excerpt from the fabulous book by William Ian Miller on the saga, the Icelandic sagas, which is called War and Peacemaking, but which is a study of the Icelandic sagas. These are essentially the Icelandic equivalent of the Torah, but they're essentially an oral tradition of stories of violent conflicts between people and families, but they take us to a much broader European and pre-European tradition of revenge, and as we talked about, vendettas, etc. This, of course, is familiar to us from a lot of literature. everyone here who has seen Hamlet will remember the always impossible to properly produce scene of the ghost, when Hamlet's father's ghost appears, and demands vengeance. But how often do we appreciate the force of what he's telling Hamlet? Hamlet, when he sees the ghost, says, "Speak, I am bound to hear." And the ghost, playing off of the term bound, says, "So art thou to revenge when thou shalt hear." Right? So the whole moral drama of the play, of course, is whether Hamlet will answer this powerful demand, moral demand, that he seek vengeance on his father's death once he's learned of it. And what William Miller's work, I should say, helps us see is that there's nothing immediate and unmediated about the process of revenge seeking. It actually requires a very complicated set of social procedures to evoke. And there's a lot of distinctions in a society between different kinds of killing, some of which require vengeance and others don't. Some of which can be resolved with a mere payment of money, the Wehrgeld, and others of which require vengeance. And these aren't sort of black and white cases. This is an excerpt from the book which follows, powerfully tells the story of one woman's effort to get her husband's uncle to avenge her husband. I'll try to read this to you. It's small on my screen. She took out the cloak which Flosi had given to Hoskold, who was her husband who's been killed, and which he was wearing when he had been killed. She had preserved all his blood in it. She returned to the hall with the cloak and quietly went up to Flosi. Flosi had eaten, and the food had been cleared from the table. Hildegun flung it over Flosi, and the blood clots showered over him. That's pretty graphic, right? Wants him to really feel this blood. Then she said, quote, "You gave this, quote, to Hoskold, Flosi, and now I am giving it back to you. He was killed in it. I call God and all good men to witness that I charge you by all the powers of your Christ and your manhood and bravery to avenge all the wounds he had on his body when he was killed, or else be called a nothing, a contemptible creature by all men." Now, we don't have time to fully study this Icelandic practice, but notice that there's nothing immediate about, Flosi doesn't sort of learn about this death and say, "I've got to go out and seek vengeance." There's actually a pretty complicated ritual performance in which the person who wants vengeance to be sought has to sort of mobilize for it. Now, again, I don't think this is a fatal flaw for Durkheim. I actually think it's helpful to see that just as the lawyers in the modern courtroom have to manipulate the moral feelings of the jury in order to make them punish, even in a, quote, primitive society, people didn't just immediately respond. There was a social process. So I don't think that's incompatible with his theory, but it complicates his story of primitive society. So I've got a few minutes left. Let me sort of flesh out, as I see it, his story. We've already explored his theory of crime and punishment. You can kind of take that away as a self-contained account. However, he had two purposes in making us look at what he thought of as primitive societies. One was to get us to see in simple form what's still important about our own practices, but the other was to help us understand what has changed from primitive to modern societies. And to just be very brief about it, and this is not really in the readings, it's only hinted at, Durkheim used the term mechanical solidarity to describe the kind of common consciousness that exists in more traditional societies. And the reason he calls it mechanical is he thinks that it's all about immediate mechanical identity with people, that everyone's the same in these societies, and that, and he's thinking again of the ancient Israelites and other kind of limited case of traditional societies that he knew about, which tended to involve everybody doing the same kind of activity. Everybody's a shepherd, or involved in some kind of hunter-gatherer society. He thought that in these kinds of societies, the core of the entire common consciousness was made up of these powerful moral values associated with our immediate identity, and usually tied up with religion, and these were what form the penal law, this kind of mechanical solidarity. Now, part of his point is that when you go to modern society, that is still there. That core set of beliefs, that common consciousness is still there, and that kind of mechanical solidarity is still there. There are moments where we identify with our moral outrage comes from our direct sense of our identity being affronted. A very good example of that would be treason, the kind of passions that get whipped up about treason, right? So some of you may have followed the travails of Corporal Bradley Manning, the person who's supposed to have leaked the information that became part of the giant WikiLeaks release. Now, most people, when they're including the government, will admit that probably no damage was done to American interests by that release, and in many ways, it helped American interests, actually, as a lot of people believe. But even if you think it did harm or perhaps put at risk, it doesn't seem like a terribly consequential move, at least from what we know thus far. And yet, if you followed it, he's not only being threatened with life imprisonment, he's being treated as somebody who may well get that as somebody who's suspected of being ready to kill themselves at all times. He's been held in very, one might say, cruel conditions. And again, that would be an example of how this kind of mechanical solidarity and its very punitive, emotionally driven desire to punish remains part of even modern societies. The difference for Durkheim is that in modern societies, in addition to this core of shared moral beliefs associated with our common identity, there's a whole set of solidarities associated not with our identity, but with our mutual interdependence. This is what he thinks the division of labor really does. You can think about kind of complicated industrial societies in which people have they don't do the same kind of things, they depend on each other a great deal. These are the kinds of relationships that express themselves in civil law, in contract law, in property law, etc. And so penal law is still there in modern society. It's still, in a sense, hot. And then this is where I'll come back to this sort of penal heat model that I talked about last week. There is still this core of moral common values in our society that tend to generate these powerful and very hot emotions. But increasingly, society's stability is held together not just by that core of penal law and moral emotional beliefs, but by this structure of interdependence, which is cooler, right? It points to forms of solidarity that are weaker in the sense of not having these powerful impulses, but nonetheless in collective can make society much stronger and more stable. And the point was that this may require less punishment. That is, as we move from a primitive society where crime and punishment are all there is that holds society together, to modern societies in which it's only part of, although still an important part of, the way that the legal system maintains our solidarity with each other. We might expect, and Durkheim does expect, we're going to see that punishment gets more lenient, and he'll say in his 2 laws of penal evolution, look how we've gone from executing people or torturing them on the scaffold to labor in penitentiaries, which is much less painful and demeaning, etc. This is an expression of the kind of reduced passion, reduced demand for vengeance that we have in a modern society that depends on the division of labor. But, and this is why I leave the metaphor of penal heat rising up even from these very low levels, even in very modern societies with lots of layers of law like that mountain there, these deep emotions will continue to force their way to the surface. And so don't expect them to go away, don't expect them to disappear to Durkheim. And indeed, even though modern society is less concerned about offending the deity, and therefore doesn't have to have this surplus of punishment that we use to appease God in the blasphemy era, we have our own, Durkheim would say, our own passions that are associated with new moral beliefs, for instance, individualism. Right? So if you think about a society like colonial Massachusetts, where adultery and blasphemy are the ultimate crimes, in our society, we don't treat them as very serious crimes or crimes at all. But we have our own version of the ultimate crimes. They may be murder, maybe it's child abuse, but there are certain crimes that push that same button, if you will. let me stop here to leave you enough time to leave the class orderly. I will maybe take up some of your questions about your time when we resume on Thursday. So thank you very much.